My next guest is Congressman Brendan Boyle. He represents Pennsylvania's 2nd District, and he's co-sponsor of the Sustainable Investment Policy Act of 2020, which would require investment advisors to establish and follow a sustainable investment policy. Congressman Boyle, great to see you. You've been thinking about the infrastructure, the scaffolding, and the drivers of sustainability for a long time. I remember in the 1990s, when I worked in the Senate, we tried to kind of talk about responsible corporations. We were shut down right away by the business community, say you can't do that. So there's been a lot of change over a period of time over what that means, what it entails. I'd love to get with the Sustainable Investment Policy Act, what needles are you trying to move in there and to instill in the American economic climate?
Yeah, great to be with you, Steve. And I think this is a wonderful program that you're putting on here. My general philosophy is that I believe in markets. Markets work. Some might be surprised to hear a Democrat saying that. I think there is a misperception out there that somehow we don't believe in markets. We do. What I believe, though, is that government as a force for good, creating an incentive or creating a structure in which we use markets as a way to build us or provide that bridge to a more sustainable future. In my view, this is both good economics, good investing, and also produces an outcome that is good for the common good.
So in this, can you give us some examples where you think the infrastructure on investment advice, I used to talk to Judith Rodin a lot, who was the previous president of the Rockefeller Foundation, who really believed in impact investing and that the bottom line for firms also had to begin including this kind of broad ESG side. So I just want to kind of give our viewers a sense of the grit of this. I mean, are there any cool examples of what you've seen evolve that you can share?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'll share with you, and I'm sure viewers are aware of the data out there that when retail investors have the option to invest into a fund that takes into account ESG principles, on average, it is a fact that those funds outperform funds that do not. So I, as an investor, and I would like others to look this way, want to have that option of putting my dollars to work in something that helps build a sustainable future and, of course, provides a good investment vehicle. We are seeing an awakening, even outside of the ESG conversation, we're seeing an awakening of consumers wanting to use the power of the purse, wanting to use their dollars and support companies that support their values. There's a whole separate conversation happening right now in corporate America, right, regarding what they should be doing, what their responsibilities are as relates to being involved in some of the more active controversies of the day regarding voting. ESG is actually related to that conversation, and it's about using our dollars to be able to advance things in which we believe, and sustainability is one of those important things.
Brendan, one of the things I have been struggling with in this conversation, reflecting back when, we tried to come up with a tax plan and said, hey, if you've got a company out there that's investing in its people, that's putting, pension dollars away, that's investing in their education benefits, and, that's doing other things that other companies were not, why not give them a tax credit? Why not call them A Corps? And at that time, the Secretary of Labor, Bob Reich, kind of stole our idea, did an op-ed, and he called it the responsible corporation. And that literally killed our proposal, which, we had some Republicans coming along, to join us. But, when you kind of inject morality, it was sort of a problem. But part of it is this question of incentivizing better behaviors for all firms. And I'm just interested, is the ESG world one where those are the good companies and you brand them and there are a lot of companies. So we're talking a little bit about screens here later, but what are the appropriate screens to come in? But I'm just interested, are there firms out there that you think ought not to be in the ESG world, or do you think you ought to give an opportunity broadly for people to begin organizing themselves in such a way that they create sustainability practices, that they are making a better planet?
Yeah, first, I am shocked to hear that ideas are stolen around here, or as I prefer to say, borrowed on Capitol Hill. But I welcome it if it is a good idea and it helps advance it and not kill it. It reminds me of why, for me, for example, I tend to talk about sustainability more than I talk about climate change because it can be exactly the same idea, it can be exactly the same issue. If you just use that hot button phrase, climate change, you're less likely to get buy-in from some of my Republican colleagues who otherwise would perhaps go along if you're talking about using markets to produce better outcomes on sustainability. Now, in terms of, should we be exclusionary in our approach or more broad-based, I certainly prefer the latter. That tends to be my approach anyway. But I found that as a member of the Ways and Means Committee and having worked on tax credits like you described in other areas, if you take a broader approach and you say that I'm not necessarily endorsing company X, Y, and Z, but why would we in any way off the bat exclude them from the ESG table? The other point that I'd make is I just see momentum for this growing. I mean, the latest report not too long ago from Morningstar talking about the outperformance in 2019 and 2020 for the ESG funds that I talked about earlier as investment vehicles. The people who are talking about this are not your usual suspects when it comes to the topic of advancing sustainability.
Brendan, this is an area that I flirt with, but I don't know super well. And I think one of the questions when I've looked before at, B Corps and different ways in which you can have double bottom lines, look at ways in which firms get either tax credits in their states for falling within certain ESG guidelines. Are you comfortable that our standards are high for those areas, or do you worry that they could be watered down? And I hate to say, you could have some folks trying to get in the ESG world that, try to ride near the bottom rather than near the top. And I just like our viewers, who may be skeptical of some of this to get an understanding of how a legislator who's thinking about these things feels about the standards we're setting.
I think it's a good question because it points or it gets to something that is always a challenge, and that is striking the right balance, right? You don't want to make the bar so difficult that companies say, oh, forget it, it's not worth chasing this credit. If you do that, then you've sort of defeated the purpose of creating the credit to begin with. On the other hand, on the other extreme, if you make it so broad that it includes so many people, then you're essentially giving away money when you don't have to. So like in many things, all good things in moderation, I would say that striking that right balance is the key when we're going forward in this.
And so let me ask you finally, another crazy question. I don't know, if this is naive or not. You're in Ways and Means, and you're the money guys, the money folks in Congress going to be looking at all of this stuff. But big infrastructure, big spending by the federal government is going to come about most likely. And are there should the federal government look at it at its own ESG frame? Are there things that, in terms of the federal government's own footprint out there in environment, in sustainability, in governance, that it can incentivize? And are those things built in, or are they afterthoughts?
No, I would tell you first, you alluded to infrastructure. Probably, Steve, about 75-80% of the time I spent this week was on this infrastructure bill or American Jobs Plan. I suspect that next week and the next several weeks it'll be about the same ratio, if not more, as between now and the 4th of July, we're attempting to get this legislation passed. Obviously, it's massive. And as you pointed out, Ways and Means is right at the center of it because we're the ones who have to raise the revenue to pay for it, or at least pay for a lot of it. Now, does government have a role, as you pointed out, in terms of looking at itself? Absolutely. A big part of this infrastructure plan is, in fact, doing exactly what you talked about, making sure that we can reduce our own carbon footprint, making the investments to revitalize our infrastructure, but modernize it to make it more energy efficient. I think that that's an important part of this infrastructure plan. The White House agrees with me on that, by the way, and you see that. Now, someone, what I would characterize as the far right, are criticizing this, saying that it's a de facto extreme environmental bill. It's nothing of the sort. It's the sort of wise investment that, to draw an analogy, any consumer would make. If the consumer has the upfront money to invest in order to reap the financial rewards over the long run of having something that's more energy efficient, as well as obviously the environmental benefit. So it's a long way of saying the answer to your question is yes. And in fact, you are going to see that as a big part of this infrastructure bill.
Your Sustainable Investment Policies Act of 2020, has that been reintroduced in the new? I mean, are you building it in? What are the chances of it passing both chambers?
I hope pretty good. I mean, obviously, last term with split government, there were a lot of bills, even if they weren't necessarily partisan. There were a lot of bills that the Senate, under previous management, so to speak, was just not going to move. I am hopeful that we will be able to get it passed this term. Certainly, we're going to continue advancing it. And again, I've been pleasantly surprised by the receptive conversations that I've had with Republican colleagues of mine who serve on Ways and Means. And I think that they like the idea of using the power of markets to help produce this outcome.
Well, I want to thank Congressman Brendan Sustainability Boyle. Congressman Brendan Boyle of Pennsylvania, member of the House Ways and Means Committee. Really appreciate you joining us today and sharing your thoughts.
All right. Thank you, Steve.